posters anytime starting tomorrow morning. If you have brought your posters, me or Mikhail or Matthew, and I alcohol in my office. So I promise you that we'll not tamper with your posters. So tomorrow morning, all the posters will be up and they can remain up for the rest of the conference. Now, by a number of people on the senior program committee, whoever was on the senior program committee, will you please stand up? Senior program committee, standing up is also members of the program committee. Will you please stand up? Thank you so much, because as you know, the quality of a conference is a work that the program committee members put into it. So, the conference is actually President Rafael Perez.
To be here, we are really, really excited about this. To remind you that the last event in this conference is going to be the community meeting, which is very important because, and second, we have really excited before the meeting, and as some of you know, this represents the power in the conference. Yeah. So, Ashok, I officially give you the power of the conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Rafael and Amilcar. Amilcar is the treasurer of ACC, and Dan, where is Dan? Dan is there. Dan is the treasurer. Carlos made these beautiful posters. So the posters, the colorful posters you see are all due to Carlos. And Rafael and Amilcar and Dan have been advice I have run to them, and they have been just extremely good about sharing advice. So thank you. ACC also has an advisory board and a steering committee. The people on this advisory board of the steering committee, will you please stand up for a minute? I'm sorry, I'm making you stand up again and again. Okay, now let me share the names of the people who have done all the work actually. And as I share your names, will you please come in the front, because it's really been a team effort, so please join me in the front here. So the program chairs are Anna Jordanes and Ellison Peace. Please join me here. And I can share with you that they both worked very hard in the United Kingdom. In the British system, it turns out that around June 1st, you have to do a lot of what they call marking, what in the United States we'll call grading. And they have been busy, and although they were marking, there's still some fun time to work on this conference. It's very much appreciated. The workshop and the tutorial chairs are Kaz Grace, Now, here is a story about Kaz. His life is a really interesting life. He was a very young baby. So sometimes when we would hold teleconferences at 7 a.m., University of Sydney, congratulations. And he is moving houses, and somehow he still finished to work on this workshop and tutorial program. So thank you very much. And just because working on one job was not enough, Kaz and Ellison also were doctoral consortium chairs. So talk about high achievers here. The local chair and media chair, will you please come forward? Mikhail and Matthew. These are really, both of them PhD students here at Georgia Tech, and I cannot tell you as a faculty member how spectacular. I have been a local chair myself for other conferences when I was a little younger, and I can tell you I never did as much work as they have done. So thank you very much to both of you. The local committee, Jeff Collins. Gerard, where are you? Okay. Anna Weisling. Anna was here earlier. Anna Shambo. Okay, very good. Come forward, please. Do you know where Anna Weisling is? Okay. And I think they're Jeff is from architecture. Community is. Some more administrative assistants and Teska Fitzgerald, Judy Long, thank you all very much. Let me just quickly mention the conference sponsors. We got a nice grant from NSF. This was in support of the Doctoral Student Consortium. We also got another nice grant from the Artificial Intelligence Journal. Been very generous in their support. So my thanks to all of them. Anna, Alison, do you want to say anything?
Just to thank all the program committee and the
Morning, putting all the things on one machine?
Yes, so those of you who are presenting short talks, some of you have already sent me your slides. The short talks, you present from whatever format works best for you. So far I've had PDF, PowerPoint and Keynote. If you think of another format to test me with, that would be literally on that. So if you can send me those slides for
So for Thursday morning, there are two sets of speakers. They are the 9 poster presenters for 5 minutes each. And they are also the chairs of the workshops, the Doctoral Student Consortium, and the tutorials. So if you will, the chairs, if you'll give just 3-minute snapshots of what happened in the tutorials or workshop, Doctoral Student Consortium, that will be very much appreciated. Anything else? Okay, then I hand this over to Amil Kar as transfer of power as the chair of the first session. Thank you. What do you need? The sound. Yes. No, there is this.
Okay, so we will start the session on foundations. So the first speaker is here, Roizen Lokram. I hope I told it close enough. And Michael O'Neill, application domains considered in computational creativity.
we just heard this. So this year has got the biggest attendance so far, which is fantastic. But I actually did a little bit more background in trying to figure out how many papers were submitted, accepted, and how many people attended each event. And I do have to say a massive thank you to many members of the program committee in helping me get these numbers. If I haven't thanked you personally yet, it's because I'm new to the field and I don't actually know what everything looks like, but I will find you and I will thank you. Thank you very much. That's great. We've got a growing field, starting from 7 for and accepted. But as I say, I'm not going to comment on why that might be, but we still see an increase in attendance, and in general, the event is growing. So the reason I looked at this event is because this is the only look at certain aspects such as music, design, art, any of those things. But this is the event that actually looks at creativity. So my own background is actually generative, and I've been, in doing so, I started looking at the fringe of CC and looking at the different papers and get a field that is growing. Is there a tendency towards certain problem things? Because what you realize as you're going through the papers, you realize there are certain groups that work on certain individual problems. So you've got, humor. I know I was getting data afternoon with one post, I know all the music generation people. But so as time progresses and as more people join the field, are there certain certain applications names that become more common? And if so, is that okay? That might be perfectly fine. Certainly happening organically. So many certain names. And our it's a basic people for any further justification. That's never a good issue for anything else. So that would just stop happening. When we look at the numbers just from the outside, what did we earn from this? So we see trends. And what does this mean to computational activity and broader applied computer science field? I'll discuss what it means in the end. So that's kind of the why I did it. It started out mostly as personal interest project. Gathered basically I was looking at so many papers and might have actually tabulate the results. So in total, I looked at 387 papers over 13 years. The numbers of references are basically because the submitted paper proceeding was 2016, but our organizers are so organized they had all the papers up online in 2 weeks. So I had to go back and edit everything into the extras, obviously. So just as an overview of what I did, there's no lexical analysis. Automated analysis of this. Basically, all categories were determined subjectively by myself, just by going through the papers. And some obviously very, very simple. You can get the title or the abstract, but a little bit more the analysis of the categories done by me reading the paper, looking through the paper, and actually seeing okay, what topic is the author actually looking at. One thing I would state is that I only identified one thing for each individual paper. In a certain sense, some were very easy, some more difficult. For instance, if it was analogy, if somebody was discussing analogy, really using images, it's difficult to tell which one the author was actually aiming for. In those cases, I just made a subjective decision and actually went from what way it's being framed. So if you talk about analogy, it's an analogy paper as far as the only time when there was more than one paper was say for each application specific. By doing this, basically took a while to go through, but in the end I identified 16 initial categories. And these were other, which is basically specific application with didn't vision anything else. Logic, story, language, analogy, sound, design, maths and science, images, music, literature, concept, humor, games, and number. Now, so as you can see here, overall, across 10 years, all of these categories, music is actually the most popular topic. As I mentioned, I work in music, and I was a little bit surprised by this result, and it basically told me that everybody has inherent bias, I think. Whether you know I'm saying that everybody should be doing what they're doing, and nobody's doing what they're doing. So I assume these are quite far down the list. I think other people think everybody automatically does what they're doing, and so assume there's a confidence. These are basically just biases by ourselves. So to me, sorry, it was interesting to know that result. But secondly, when I started thinking about it, okay, a lot of these categories, there's a huge amount of overlap. They're really sort of subcategories of a broader category, a broader thing group. Specifically, there's a lot of things like language, humor, storytelling. These all work in natural language processing. So as a secondary kind of analysis, I decided to group categories that kind of had a lot similar together and just form a broader analysis. So in that sense, then we actually reduced it down to 7 groups. Games and coding have been getting a lot of traction, put them into other things. Music and sound together, logic and maths, and then individually image, concept and none. Now, I've obviously kept concept by itself. By concept and people that are discussing creativity from the point of view concept was so a lot of blending techniques was going to be a total blending concept, and that to me was a unique so we now see other most notable of this graph is the fact that logic and in comparison to what we consider traditionally aesthetic applications. And to have an observer, that might seem quite obvious, but I'm sure many of us here have read back on creativity and say creative mind by Mark Goldner or many conservative studies whereby applications or earlier studies by Einstein, or even just the idea of logical creative thought, like looking problems with putting beams together. Logical problems is often where we start describing the idea of creativity. And yet, over the years here, to be much more focused on the aesthetic, or the public considered to be aesthetically creative topics. So that was just kind of an unusual finding to me. But the advantage as well to reducing 16 categories down to 7 is that I can do more of an analysis, rather than static analysis, I can actually look at the different categories over time. So what I'm showing here is every basically what we see is highly represented. I'm not sure if it's up here, but basically we're seeing other is very popular overall. It's actually becoming more popular in recent years. It's the second highest or the highest, I think, since 2011. So that kind of means that we're looking at more topics. People are submitting more topics, they're submitting new topics. Keep the top area. So that's what we're looking at there. From a point of view of other other topic, but I decided that other topic if the author is specifically naming an actual topic. So then many topics out there that fall into the big question then is, why is this relevant? Is this relevant to all and what can we actually learn from any of this? So, in a nutshell, if I was to say, quantify creative hurry or a system that generates recipe for a hurry or a system that generates the notation for a sonata, hopefully the answer from the response you give me is, well, tell me more about the system. Because still it makes no sense to just compare these two systems without actually knowing more about them. My point is, you shouldn't really compare systems purely on what they actually have, specifically because efforts aren't anywhere related. Isn't directly in process of the system, what's actually happening, not just what's going on. Really missed the point there. So that was a little bit disheartening to me. Because to me, it's really all about the system. But the extreme view is that if it's all about the system, then the application name doesn't actually matter at all, then it should be arbitrary. And that doesn't make sense either. So there's a bit to be considered here. And what I wanted to consider was, can we ask, like, is creativity the name of things? And initially I thought, yeah, of course it is. And I thought, maybe not. Let's say years did not think that was a very good question to answer. So I said, I won't state that. And what if I stated is really possible in any domain? And I think if you look at the view of creativity as creative thought or solving a problem in a creative manner, then I think it should be easy to say yes. In any domain, you should be able to find a creative problem within that domain. You should be able to say some application in the domain. So if this is the case, then why is it so ready to stick to our domain? And the simple answer to that is because we have expertise. We bring the expertise into our own domain, and we have a huge embodiment of knowledge that we've developed over time. This is our field, this is where we're comfortable, and obviously this is where we're going to suit ourselves, and that makes complete sense. But if we're to consider multi-thread domain, for instance, domain systems, does true creativity or a system capable of creativity need to be multi-domain? Like, we'd like to say yes, but really this draws the problem of we're talking about weak versus strong creativity. The system can create, maybe say, music, won't necessarily be able to create humor unless you basically program to change your expectation. And this obviously isn't AI or anything that weak versus strong AI is a similar type of problem. So, is there any concrete, these are very broad suggestions, I'm just going to throw them out there as possibilities. Should we actually doing? And if we didn't, how would we? As a community, I mean, I think some obvious methods to use is structure before the challenge. Maybe part of a conference or something as a satellite to the conference. The idea of actually giving a logical I saw some great works today on training challenges, mini plans. So, and I think there's a similar thing in Gecko, whereby competitive. But what I'd be more proposing here is the idea that we have a panel of experts that actually review the submissions from the point of view of how creative is the problem, or is the system itself. Is there any way we could encourage the application of computational creativity to real world problems? Again, it's a bit out there. I mean, but how amazing. And this one I'm on. Could we encourage established could we encourage established researchers to actually change domains? And what sense, but by this I mean not actually change the name. An established system could be applied in something else, like capital aspects, could we use bots, those standard something like that. Some kind of what I'd like to do almost like a master's challenge. In doing so, if we're actually looking at different actually application things, could we actually change how we actually
to another domain. And I'm finding that some things really do transfer and it's very easy. And other things, I just don't understand the other domain enough. And so I'm collaborating, and that's the way of doing it. Did you notice anything?
There were a few, I'm afraid to name names, but I could possibly give one or two examples. I'm not sure, again, I'm so sorry if I do look up, but, or look back. I know, like, say, someone and then later on, has been talked about games, and obviously validation was kind of like non-thing specific. And I don't think it might be naming one person, but I think that might be somewhat to do with the team as well. They had a chat with Michael last year, and he's very interested in games. If you go on the team, then the whole team goes in a direction, and I think that's going to have to work with the team and say with collaboration, you're taking knowledge from other people, from other domains, and then integrating that with your own systems, and then getting to the game. So collaboration is key, definitely, because there is this massive ramp up in the game knowledge in definitely. So if you switch, when you're wasting, I wouldn't say you're wasting your time, you have an awful lot of initial effort, and then you really have to work upon it to make that switch.
It's interesting that education and ethics go back. Right, so one would expect, for example, that creativity in education might be this. Is it okay? I can talk louder. Nobody has accused me of being general. So more loudly, I was just wondering that one can talk about creativity in education, and that it appears not to be a major domain in the common with the other. And one can also talk about ethics of computational creativity, and that question again has not yet risen to the top.
True, yeah, I think both very, very interesting topics, and very, all I can say is what I've observed. So I just haven't seen some of those topics there. It was an interesting workshop today here as well on the name of
Social justice.
Social justice, yeah, which I thought was a very, very interesting topic. So it's great to see those kind of areas cropping up more, and I think these kind of areas are very, very important in a lot of things too.
Do you have any idea what happened to logic?
No, I really don't know. It's almost like it never really gained traction here in the group, and I don't know why. Actually, sorry, there was one kind of one of the reviewers gave me this idea that they were moving computational computer science away from, say, symbolic representations towards stochastic and pattern-based representations with clear deep nets and those kind of things, which work better with the pattern recognition and the representation of creative tasks. So that could be something to do with.
But there's some discrete mathematics and different types of mathematics.
Yeah. I don't know, personally I'd like to see more, but besides doing it myself, I'm not sure how second the course.
Thank you, that was great. Instead of talking about creativity, I'd like to talk about the information of creative tasks. And whenever, and that's not that often, there's creative tasks that do exist in different domains. And in that case, often there is some transfer that has been done. I take just one example in music and in dance generation, because the temporal and the multidimensional in similar ways. The same pipeline, even the same algorithm, in that case CRBM, have been applied successfully for the creative task of style imitation, which can be envisioned both in dance, imitating the style of a dancer, or in music, imitating the style of a composer. So I think it's by defining things in terms of creative tasks that we can think of those trans-domain sort of applications.
Yeah, very good.
Alison, last question.
Have you looked at how other disciplines that investigate psychology, creativity, or sociology, or in the popular cultural versions of creativity, how the different domains break down those disciplines as well, whether that's mirrored in ours?
I really haven't actually. I know it's really interesting to see that. It continues to take out the competition kind of with our perceptions of creativity. I genuinely don't know, but that would be really interesting
Okay, thank you. Let's.
Now, another important theme, teaching computational creativity. Maya.
The paper is written by a set of people. Besides Maya, Ashok Goel, Colin Johnson, Ana Jordanos, Carlos Leon, Rafael Pérez e Pérez, Anu Toivonen, and Dan Ventura. So I will close it.
That's shocking. Is this better? I can hear an echo now. Do I need to repeat anything, or is this just continue? All right, so here I am, and it's time to prepare a course on computational creativity, and I start looking up resources, and I read a whole bunch of papers, and I have a blast, and I still have no idea how to design the course because there was virtually nothing. It was very real, very real problem. And perhaps if you're in the field for 10 years, that's not as much of a problem, but when you're pretty new, then it's a real challenge. So I put together something which in retrospect wasn't as bad as it could have been. And I kept improving it, and I did manage to get about 5 times as many students who were interested in working on that than on my previous field, so that was good. But things came to a kind of a different level when I was asked to develop a program on computational creativity. And I decided that it was time to get some advice. And so I contacted a whole bunch of CC researchers, and everybody agreed to write this paper. It was amazing, and it was really a wonderful experience writing a paper with all of these people. I learned a lot, and it was just very enjoyable. And I think what we created is very, very worthwhile, and hopefully will help a lot of people. So, okay, so you want to teach CC. That was me, the male version of Maya, struggling. Where to start? What do you teach? And how is it different from teaching? The paper is dense. Okay, it was written by 8 researchers. A lot of us could not even put in a lot of the stuff that we wanted to put in. So what I'm going to present today is really just scratching the surface. Okay? And also just by the nature of the paper, I couldn't. Sometimes the way that you do a presentation is very honest to the paper. I couldn't do it here because there's just so much information in there that you already know, and I didn't want to spend 20 minutes telling you stuff. Okay, so the simplest way to think about this is that it's a teaching guide for people who have never taught CC and would like to do that, and for those of us who have been teaching CC but want to do it better. It's also, incidentally, became a survey of the field, an introductory survey. So that's another way of thinking about this contribution. Everybody can hear me? So what do we have in this teaching guide? There are quite a few parts in there that can be thought of as how to introduce CC. Now, because CC is so different from other fields, so for our students, how to introduce it, how to make a smooth transition from what they're used to computational creativity is an interesting challenge. We discussed generative methods that are appropriate to various kinds of CC classes. Of course, evaluation methods. You cannot have a CC course without talking about evaluation methods. Now, some of these things we feel are necessary, and some of them are just options, things you can pick from when you're thinking about how to design a class. We had a lot of fun thinking about sharing different assignments at work and didn't work in our classes. And also briefly discuss some interdisciplinary approaches. ICCC naturally overlaps with many different disciplines. And many of us found it beneficial to try to bring in these different disciplines in various ways into our classes. And share how we've done that. Okay, when we talk about education, we have to discuss learning objectives. So I'm not going to go through a whole list of teaching objectives with you, but they roughly fall into these 4 categories. So in a CC class, we want our students to gain new ways of thinking. The whole concept of CC, the idea that a computer can be creative, the idea that it can be a co-creative partner was a really big deal for me conceptually. So some of these conceptual changes are some of the most important things that our students can gain from this class. Also, whether directly or indirectly, students can become more creative themselves, better understand the creative process, and more actively engage in creative activities. Then there are core CC concepts like evaluation and intentionality, understanding the difference between mere generation and CC. So those are also things that are part of our learning objectives. We want our students to be able to critically analyze CC systems, compare them to each other. When they build their own systems, to be able to reason about what's working, what's not working. And of course, one more. Okay, so how can we introduce CC? There are many different ways. We're just sharing some ideas that we've tried. So one approach is to start with human creativity, and that's usually how I start my classes. So human and computer creativity are related in many different ways, not just because they're human. And that's a natural starting point for us. But there are CC systems that have used human model of creativity in their design, and vice versa. There are things that work for ICCC systems that can later help explain the way that humans create. So some things that could be discussed is the history of human creativity, which is very interesting because it shows you that creativity has been a moving target. Right? So before computers, or computers were very primitive, when humans would emulate nature or emulate great masters, that was considered creative. And right now, it's harder and harder to agree on what creativity is. It's become more and more complicated. And then I find it also helpful to debunk some creativity myths. All of us, well, maybe not us in this room, but humans in general have a lot of myths about creativity. For example, the idea that creativity happens in magical moments of inspiration. So it's good to go through some of these so that by the time we talk about computer creativity, our students are standing on a firmer ground. They're less likely to be hindered by these myths. And then I actually explicitly discuss how humans can be more creative, because that ends up tying in directly with some ways in which computers can begin to be creative. All of us have found that it's necessary to introduce some systems, perhaps earlier in the course, because we can talk about CC all we want, but to really get a sense for what it is, after, and these are just a few of the examples, after seeing a few CC systems, seeing their output, discussing a little bit about how they work, students get real intuition about what it is. So here are the painting full, Aaron Machika, and some other ones that we mentioned in the paper, along with discussion questions. Then, of course, we need to somehow define CC, and it's not easy. Of course, defining CC is very complicated. And Prosecco has a really nice definition online. But two interesting ones come from the cognitive and engineering perspectives. So from a cognitive perspective, the focus is more on the process, whereas on the engineering perspective, the focus is more on the output and convincing the audience that what you're producing is creative. So this leads to an interesting discussion that helps students understand what CC is. Along with an interesting exercise of placing systems along the spectrum, so from cognitive to the engineering perspective and anywhere between, to help students understand how diverse CC is and start to internalize some of these different perspectives. Also useful is looking at CC from a search perspective. It creates kind of a nice analogy for students to start understanding this topic. This in particular are Wigan's 3 criteria to help compare CC. All right. One of the perhaps most important things to include, of course, are some generated methods and some evaluation methods. So we'll list them. I won't pause here too much because I'm sure you're familiar with these. Okay. One of I think the main contribution of the paper is also a discussion of various assignments that we've used. So coming from Tony Beale's online book, this idea of Twitter bots, which make for a very nice introductory assignment. Allowing our students to double in some form of generation, a little bit of creativity before having to necessarily master a lot of the more complicated concepts. So you can do that early on. Another idea is for them, before learning models of creativity that other people have come up with, to develop their own model of creativity. And that has been successful in our classrooms. Cross-domain analogy tends to make for good assignments. They have a lot of fun taking poetry, text, or music, trying to extract the essence from it, and then putting that essence, often through substantive analysis, into a different domain. Paper debates allow students to look at CC papers, and half the class is assigned to be pro the paper, and half the class is assigned to be against, and then that leads to a nice beginning for discussion. Of course, a large self-proposed project is often a nice idea in a CC class. Lets our students try to build their own CC systems. And finally, exams have been a tricky point. A lot of us have experience with trying to give traditional exams and feel that it didn't work very well, that it wasn't suitable for the type of culture we're creating, or even for the kind of material that's getting taught. And so one very nice idea has been, instead of a traditional final exam, to have them assess the quality of their project, how creative their project is, using one of the established metrics that were taught in class. To have them be evaluators of their own project in the form of it. So that works. That's work nicely. All right, how much time do I have? 1 minute, that's perfect. Okay. So CC is very interdisciplinary. We know that, right? It's connected to various artistic forms. It's connected to creativity and engineering and science. So how do we bring in these interdisciplinary perspectives into our classes? One of the simplest solutions, and one that I did the first time I taught it, I had a lot of fun with many invited speakers. So invited speakers can provide kind of an easy in. You can invite somebody from the arts or from any other related discipline and have them talk about what is creativity in their field, how do they use anything remotely related to CC to become more creative within their domain. A more deeper solution is co-teaching. So co-teaching a class with a person in another discipline, that's more challenging, but possibly more rewarding because our students really get exposed to another way of looking at the world, which should be very helpful. And last time I taught CC, I actually had an interdisciplinary classroom, where about a third of my class were art students. And that was a challenge on its own, of course. I'm used to teaching computer science students. But nevertheless, it can be very rewarding, partially because we learn from these students, but in particular, once you have interdisciplinary groups, and Shop also has a lot of interdisciplinary groups in his work, that tends to lead to research that's perhaps would not happen otherwise. All right, please share your teaching resources up on this website. We started doing that, and it'd be great if you could continue this trend. Make it easier for each other to teach this stuff. All right, more or less on time.
Questions? You want to know your name.
I'm just curious whether you had any success to overcome institutional barriers for
Well, I actually don't have experience doing it. I was only trying to think about it. I think it was Ben.
I have, but there was no barrier, so I have no experience overcoming any
So
barriers.
we're coming to this.
The other professor said, "Here, come do this with me," and I said, "Okay," and we did it. Got to see it.
I think the scalability would be the some institutional barrier, right? So everyone.
Yeah, I think one thing that has worked for some of my colleagues in other disciplines has been to, one person would essentially volunteer and not get the credit for to get it all wrong. I don't remember that stuff.
Well, that happened. I mean, I got no teaching credit for doing
Oh,
what
well,
I did.
yeah, here we go.
We did
That's
it
a solution.
because we thought it would be fun. That's how you overcome the problem.
Here we go.
Our experience in London, talk about this as well. One of the things we made, this is an ongoing master's program, we're linking it against video games, for instance, because it makes things easier. Okay, because the student sees it as a potentially useful program for having the students work on something, right? So one of the problems is this, that when you teach computational activity, it's not clear what they are going to do.
There's no doubt there is a great benefit for students and also teachers, but it costs a lot from administrators' point of view.
I think co-teaching.
Yeah.
Well, there are other ways, right? That's too hard. Yeah.
Many thanks for that. I must be looking forward to this type of paper for years. I'm just wondering about your assignment part. So you said, well, self-directed long projects might also be quite good. And well, I know our students, they usually get 3 months. They start 3 days before the hand-in deadline, right? So I'm wondering if you and your co-authors could think of any milestones you could assign to structure these projects better and get them.
So I've tried several things. I've tried asking them to write a proposal and then give me progress on steps, and I've since simplified the process. And now because it worked for me, it doesn't mean it will work for everybody else. But I make a really big deal out of it. I tell them it has to be research, and they get kind of scared. And they have to have their project approved. They have to present the previous work, and I just keep reminding them almost every week how the final project has to be excellent, has to be new. I can help them at any point, and they do actually come for help and they show me what they've done. And about maybe 75% of students that I'm taking seriously, but then a small percent that I can deal with. Yeah.
Last question.
I just wanted to actually comment on that last one. This is to you, Christian, but also to anybody else involved in this. Look to how design education has tackled this. There are often huge semester-long projects in studio-based education with many milestones along the way, and it often centers on formative evaluation. Get them to prototype something, even if it's on paper, get them to evaluate, even if it's with a bunch of friends, and get them to actually reflect on that. And then I have to start over.
Thank you.
The papers that we were looking forward. That Ventura, how to build that CC system. Yeah,
yeah. We can go for refreshment.
Are you using your HDMI?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Just take it.
I found that to be problematic exactly in that way, so you might want to try the VGA to do it afterwards.
I think it's gonna work. I have big hopes. Okay, this talk could go all kinds of ways. I hope it goes well. I think it's really complementary to the two talks we just had, so I like that very much. I hope that you feel like that afterwards too. My idea here had two main purposes for writing this paper in the first place. One is to try to provide sort of a recipe for beginners and a way to enter into the field and say, well, what do you mean by building a system that's supposedly computational creative? And can we talk about it in general terms and not in the main specific terms? So it's necessarily abstracted away from any particular domain. And the other reason I do this is because I think we need to continue to talk about this stuff. And so some of the things This is my way of looking at things, and this is my experience building systems in multiple domains and reviewing and reading about other systems in many other domains. And my attempt at abstracting from those what I think everybody's doing sort of. You can agree or disagree about this, and I think you will. You want to those two things. Okay, so first I want to just quickly say, what do I mean when I mean a CC system or a CC agent? And we all need to say this all the time because nobody knows what creativity means, and we just don't even talk about it anymore. So what we typically mean, and what I mean in this instance anyways, is a system that behaves in the following sorts of ways. It does novel things, it does things that have value, and it does them intentionally. And when I say behaves, I'm using this in a very broad sense of either the process it's using, the choice that it's making, or the product it's producing. All of that I mean by behavior, I mean any or all of those things. And novelty and utility and intentionality, we'll sort of talk about a little bit more as we go along, what they mean, what we think they mean. And this is the kind of system I'm talking about. This is an abstract, computational creative system. My view of it. One view of it. It's embedded in a domain, and when I say it's embedded in a domain, I mean it's embedded in there because it is possessing some set of domain knowledge, some set of knowledge about a particular domain. And that cannot be abstracted away, other than to say there it is, and you can't do anything until you talk about that. It has to come from a domain. It also has some sense of aesthetic, and I mean that in a very general term too, some measure of what is a member of that domain, even hopefully a good member of that domain. So that's what I mean by aesthetic. That's also informed by the domain and why this is embedded there. And also, this is going to produce something, hopefully, that will be part of that domain, or potentially be part of that domain anyway. And so all three of these things sort of anchor this particular domain. And then there's some other internal mechanisms for evaluation, for generation, for conceptualization that interact with these domain anchored things, probably in some domain specific ways, to produce, to make the system go. And I think that it's an interesting exercise to try to answer the question that people always ask, well, what is this? Why is this different? This is part of AI. What's the deal? At least for sure, all of machine learning and a lot of our more broad AI systems have traditionally evolved to the point where what they do now is some kind of optimization. There's some kind of goal that they need to get to. There's some optimal mountain that they need to climb, and we've gotten very, very good at climbing mountains. But that's not the kind of thing that we do in computational creativity. We may use that as a tool, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is something quite different. We're looking for something. We're trying to build something new. We're trying to invent something. There's a lot of equally valuable peaks. We need to find one of them and get there. And those peaks may even be moving and changing over time, and we still need to find them and get there. And there's no sense of, if we just climb up here, we'll be at the end eventually. There's no best piece of art, there's no best song, there's no best math theorem, there's no way to optimize these things, and we're not interested in optimization. So we've all seen a lot of examples of the kinds of domains and the kinds of problems they're talking about. The kinds that Roisin talked about today already. We've seen visual art, we've seen humor, we've seen advertising, we've seen story generation, we've seen mathematics, we've seen games, we've seen music. We see that stuff, some of that stuff a lot and some of it less, and I was really happy to see that the other categories growing and people are doing more and more kinds of things. I want to plug in for us doing more and more kinds of things as well. And in particular, I also really like Roisin's talk about how the logic, the sciencey kind of stuff is so underrepresented. We all know this. We need to do something about it, I think. There are lots of really cool, interesting, important sorts of domains that we should play in. The kind that can make changes in the world that a new computer poet or a new computer musician might not make. And the kind that might be less resisted by people also, right? If we invent something new architecturally, or if we invent a new kind of drug that actually saves lives, nobody will care whether a human did it or a computer did it. If we come up with some artificial protein synthesis that changes lives for the better, or if we, this is more whimsical, but travel planning, robotics, cybersecurity, there's just a whole ton of fields that we could apply the principles that we are learning that need the kinds of stuff that we're doing, because they're not optimization problems either. Okay, how are we going to do it? Well, we need some representation. Given that we're in a particular domain, we need some way to represent the stuff that we're working on in that domain. And I actually think, for the most part, we need two types of representation that are two different things. One of them is internal, well, I'll start with the other one. One of them is sort of an external phenotypic sort of representation. And I don't mean phenotypic in the biological sense, I mean phenotypic in the external expressive sort of sense. So that's the kind of representation that is what people recognize when they look at the domain. So if you're talking about recipes, it's a recipe, or if it's or maybe it's a pot of food. If you're talking about a story, it's a story that you can read. If you're talking about a painting, it's a painting. These are the phenotypic representations. And you may or may not work with them directly. You may have something slightly abstract in that. So instead of generating an entire story, it might be a story, a very detailed story outline. Right? And then that might be good enough. Or it might be, instead of an actual painting on a canvas, it might be a digital image, and that might be good enough. Or instead of a math theorem, it might be a sequence of predicates, and that might be good enough. Right? So there may be some slight movement away from the domain, but something that's still phenotypically recognizable and appreciated by the field for that domain. And then there's another kind of representation that's genotypic, and again, not biologically genotypic, but internally representational, right? The kind of thing that's easy for the system to work with and manipulate and reason about, but maybe doesn't make sense for outside the system. For stories, this might be like entity relationship graphs or schemata or plans or something like this that are abstract and easy to work with. Or for music, it might be lead sheets or viewpoints or MIDI or something like that. For math, it might be prologue or trees or Boolean formula, things that people don't want to consume or the field doesn't want to consume, but they're easy to manipulate. So we need to figure out what we're going to do for that. And then we need to build a knowledge base about the domain. We talked about we need to populate a knowledge base with domain-specific information. That's what we have this representation. We need to use that representation to build a knowledge base so that we know what we're talking about. And I don't mean we, the researchers, I mean our system knows what it's talking about. And this might happen a lot of different ways, right? We might scrape the web for recipes, and you can get ingredients and ingredient relative amounts and actual whole recipes and cooking plans and ratings and all kinds of cool stuff from the web for some kinds of domains. Or you might get Google Ngram. There might be tools out there already like Google Ngrams or WordNet or ConceptNet or other things that people have built and are out there and usable, and we can consume them. Or there might not be anything really usable and out there that we can consume. If you're writing a joke program, a joke generating program, maybe you need to talk to people that know how to do humor and ask them to give you a set of rules, and then good luck implementing those rules. But that's how you might populate your knowledge base, right? You might not be able to scrape from the web. Or you might be building board, you want to have a system that invents board games, and so you find something online called the game description language, and then you have experts, people that know board games, that can take the board games and translate them into this GDL description language so that you have a population of background information about board games that you can use. Already, are you serious? Okay, I'll try. We need an aesthetic, some way to measure stuff about what we're creating, right? This aesthetic should correlate with our ideas of novelty and value. And I guess that's all I'll say about that for now. Oh, one thing that's interesting is if you Google the word aesthetic, Google Images thinks that it means pink and purple and Japanese. Most of them. I don't know why, but that's what I found out. After that, we need some sort of method of conceptualization. Our system needs to be able to conceptualize in the domain and manipulate and possibly generate from this concept the kinds of things that it's doing. So this might be in art, a library of semantically clustered images, or in poetry, templates, or recurrent neural networks, or in games, probabilistic grammar, a set of classes. It just could be all kinds of things. And I have lots of little hints and ideas and suggestions in the paper for the kinds of things people are doing. Then we need a generative process. And in some ways, this generative process might be the most boring and least interesting part of the system. Or it might be a really, really interesting part. It just depends how you're doing things. It might come from the conceptualization. So if you are building a music system and your conceptualization is some sort of Markovian process, then you can just sample that process and boom, you've generated something. Or you might have some kind of system where you can't do that at all and you need to generate in some other way. So you use logic programs or genetic algorithms or combinatorics or something. It could be very brute force or it might be very informed. Once you've built something, once you've generated something, we need to evaluate it. And because we have two levels of representation, we have two levels of evaluation as well. So we have a genotypic level where we're evaluating our story outlines or our story schemata or something to see if we think they're good conceptually, right? And this could actually be, this level of generation is or evaluation is sometimes incorporated in the generation and sometimes it's separate. After we have a good conceptual generation or a genotypic thing that we've generated and we think it's good, we need to translate it into the phenotype. It needs to be expressed in the phenotype. I actually don't know which direction that's going. I could never decide. But we have some method of turning a genotype into a phenotype. And once we've done that, we need another kind of evaluation. And it should not be evaluating the same kinds of things we already evaluated genotypically. It wouldn't make any sense. It'd be a waste of time. Typically, this is more holistic. So a really good example is if you have a recipe generating system, you create a recipe and it has lots of ingredients and maybe some processes, and you think about that if that's going to be good, but you need to cook it and eat it. This is about, right? If you write music, you think about it conceptually, you write a score down, you look at it, it seems like it's going to be good, but it needs to be played and listened to see if it's really what you meant. Right? That's the difference. That's what I mean here. So it's that second level sort of perceptual and holistic evaluation. Okay, when we put it all together, we can write down either a formal sort of expression of what I just said, or a sort of pseudocode expression of what I just said. And this looks very nicely linear and organized, and probably in practice, it's less linear, and there's probably some going back and refiguring things. But if everything worked great, this is how you would do it, and the only nonlinear part would be the loop where you're generating until you're happy, or forever. In the interest of time, I won't say anything here about, except for the fact that we can simplify this in some cases, and by simplifying, I mean collapse the two representations into one. So you don't have genotype and phenotype, you just have phenotype. You lose some power, but it gets simpler. And you can also complexify by allowing more interaction with your environment, which introduces a time, a concept of time, so that your knowledge base changes over time, your aesthetic changes over time, your way you generate, everything can change over time. And that's actually the kind of thing we really like to see, but that's too fancy to start with. Intentionality is a can of worms. I said we wanted the system to be intentional. I think we can make some weak claims about systems that are built the way I'm talking about building them, having some level of intentionality. And we can argue about that. I think we can make some weak claims in the sense that our system has built-in goals to produce novelty and value. And that's already a little level of intentionality. On top of that, our system process and its product are correlated because it understands what it's doing through its aesthetic. So that's another little bit of intentionality. And we can actually ramp this up a little bit more if we want to by having our system provide framing information about why it did what it did. And that can help. If there is some way to understand what the system did and it makes sense to us in some way, we will be willing to grant it some more level of intentionality. There's a lot more to say about that, but that's just enough to let 0 minutes. Okay. All I want to say here is when we're done, we need to evaluate the system externally. And that could be at the domain level. In other words, I have a system that writes music. I need other musicians to tell me if it's any good. Not me anymore, not the system anymore, other musicians. And I also need the CC community to tell me if it's any good from a CC perspective. So there's actually two kinds of external evaluations we can do about. We should steal as much as we can when we build these systems. That's what that means. And there's this whole idea about meta-level stuff, right? I've been talking about concrete domains with concrete artifacts, but you could imagine any of the abstract pieces of the system we talked about being the domain, right? So you could have a system that creates aesthetics, that's its domain, or a system that creates knowledge representations, and that's its domain. And then we get into the turtle problem, and we'll just stop with that and let us have any questions. Thank you very much. I wanted to.
They did, okay, yeah.
There we go. That's what's supposed to happen when you're. Yes.
If I understand you correctly, I think you were suggesting that a computational creativity system should be able, say for a recipe, to simulate its making and eating.
Yes, I am saying that. That's not that all systems do that, but I think it would be great.
Do they?
The IBM system actually does that in the sense that it has a model based on the science of flavor and olfactory sensation, right? So in a sense, they do that. And I think that's quite nice. So yes, I think
not quite making as not quite eating.
I agree, but it's a step in that direction. Yes, I agree. And yes, it doesn't make sense to have computers actually eat food. But to the extent
so by extension, anything that produces a description ought to be evaluated by a simulated generation of the thing that's described and a simulated use of the thing.
Yes, I think that would be the idea. It's hard in practice.
So thank you for a great presentation. It's a useful recipe.
At
the end, you talked about I can't remember whether you said the meta-level problem or the turtle problem.
They're the same problem.
I would like to, yes, I would like to say that it's not a problem at all, and it's a really useful thing that we can actually put this infinite number of levels and just collapse it down into the one. And that's really why I wrote the 2006 paper that says that about Odin's idea. So that's good. But I think you have a turtle hiding in your system.
I probably do.
So specifically, the phenotypic and the genotypic distinction. I agree that's a really useful distinction, but I'd be willing to bet that if you do the analysis on most systems, you will find the genotypic one is the same as the phenotypic one plus some meta-level stuff.
It's another creative level. In order to produce a phenotype, you need another creative process.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know that you need to do it that way, actually. But I think that happens.
Yeah, right, that's what I mean. I think it will come out de facto that it is that way. And therefore, arguably, one ought to say so. And then someone will show that it's not true if it's not.
I hadn't thought about that. It's a nice point. I like that. Yeah.
So great talk, thank you. I guess one of the things I've been hearing a lot in the sessions about is just the word domain. And it's an interesting word to me because it sounds to me in your talk like you're saying that domain is the one thing that gets held invariant in the system. Right? Like the domain is the space in which we act, and if only we can come up with some formal representation of this domain, then if we solve the domain problem, we can import domain into our system and like we're done. But I think
I don't think we're done. I think we're starting.
Well, sure. Well, but like we've got a domain in which we can do the computational creative. When I think about human artists that I know and the kind of creative work that I want to do, I think we tend to think about domain as reflexive, right? And that each piece that we contribute towards our field changes the definition of that field, right? And changes what the domain is that we work in. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what this recipe would look like where domain cannot be held constant. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
where your system is in itself.
It does.
Your domain.
Yeah, it does, and that's a great idea. I kind of think about it as help fix, but I do admit the possibility of changing because your system is producing artifacts for the domain. So in a sense, the domain changes a teeny little bit if anybody will agree that oh, that's a new artifact, right? And once your toes in the door, you could imagine doing really earth-shatteringly kind of domain-changing things. But that's fairly rare. But I think that's great. If the domain can change over time and the system pushes the domain, I mean, this is transformation, right? This is the kind of thing that we all think is the holy grail. I don't have any thoughts about how we might do it so much yet because I think there's enough to already do. But I think that's where we want to take it. I think that'd be great. Yeah.
A question on one of your previous slides, the external evaluation. A suggestion that the system is not created until someone else says it is.
Yes, in a sense, I think I think that. Yes.
I understand why you put that in there, but if you look at a creative artist, they don't need that external validation. Now, once they're an expert artist, they don't need to be told whether their work is creative. The evaluation stops at them.
But in a sense, yes, I agree, and in a sense, I disagree. I agree that once you're an expert and you write music and you know it's music and you know it's good, you're done. But I also think there is a social aspect to creativity that you can't get away from people. Like, even if you're satisfied, like I paint this painting, I think it's awesome, I'm gonna paint it in my house or whatever, I love it. If nobody else thinks it's awesome, it's not the same kind of creative, I think, in a sense. And in another sense, it doesn't matter because creative is it doesn't
matter, right?
It doesn't matter.
It just not definition. I mean, if you believe it's creative and no one else does, that's fine. It's
that's right.
That part creativity.
And the other thing is that art and creativity are not the same thing.
Also true. Yeah, that's right. And it kind of depends what the goal of building the system is, right? If I'm building the system because I want to invent a drug that will save the world, and I think I've done it, but it doesn't, we never tested on anybody, then it doesn't matter what I think. And if instead I just want to produce something really cool aesthetically, hang in my wall, and I think it's done, then it's done. So it kind of depends where you, what the purpose of the whole thing is. The same as with people, right? It depends why you write music, or why you paint, or why you're a chef, or why you're a mathematician.
But also when you introduce the concept of value in a direct insert to the
yes.
definition of creativity,
yes.
This is also the point of invention, right? It might be valuable for one person, but then the value goes up if it's valuable for the people. So
yeah.
It's inside of that.
I mean, it's a different value. I mean, it's not that it goes up, it might go up.
Yeah, it's a different value.
Yeah, I know, I'm oversimplifying, but it's just there's something in it when you play with the concept of valuable product, right? That it's just those are the degrees. How valuable
it's true, and the nice thing about the value thing and defining it is it gives you a way to decide whether you've done it or not. If your value is, I'm going to put this on my wall, I like it, and you do it, then you've done it, right? It's assuming you're honest that, yes, I really did want this on my wall, and you've done it. And if your value is, I want someone to buy it for $1 million, that's a different thing. And you need that to happen before you can be honest and say my system did it. Yeah, yes.
So these days, explanation is a very big thing in AI.
Yeah.
So European scientific societies are demanding that AI systems be explained. Is there a special burden on creative systems to be able to explain this?
That's a great question, and I kind of think it depends what the system's goals are again, right? Simon Colton likes to talk about how artists are famously not honest about why they did what they did and how they did what they did. And that's part of the mystique of it, right? It makes the art cooler or something. So I guess maybe they're on the hook to explain something, even if they're not going to be honest about it. But some artists won't even give you a title. They won't say anything, and it's all on you. I think that they are on the hook to explain, and the explanation could be explicit in the sense that they write a paragraph and say this is why I did it, or show a sequence of images that got me from this place to that place, or the conceptualization that made me think of this design for this building or whatever. Or it could be more implicit in the sense that sometimes it's just obvious when you're done, that was a good idea. And now that I've seen it, now that I've seen somebody do that or something do that, I can see why they did it. I understand it. It's great. So I think, yes, you're on the hook for it. I don't know if you need to do it explicitly or implicitly, but if that's related to that intention thing too, right? Was it an accident? Did you trip over it and notice it, or did you find it and mean it? I think that's really important. Whether the system shares it or not, maybe is another thing. The system better be able to produce it.
Yeah, sorry, me again. So am I right in understanding you're saying that if the system has no intention to be creative, then it's neither the process nor the product is going to be creative?
I think that that's a fair statement, yes. And I think that we've done some, I think us and other people have asked people, what would it take for you to believe that a system is creative, or when you believe somebody else is creative, and intention or some variation on that is a big thing. Autonomy and intentionality, that's one of the big hangups people have. So if you don't have that, that's the first nail in your coffin if people want to criticize. If it doesn't seem like there's intentionality.
And Dan, do you include the designer in the system?
Do I include it? Well, you can't ever get the designer all the way out of the system. I think, and it depends. The system could be, there's a whole spectrum from completely autonomous to just creativity support tools. I'm more interested in the fully autonomous.
But even that's design.
It is, but I think the goal for most people that build autonomous systems is to get, be abstracted away from it as much as possible, right? So I talk about this more in the paper, but we want to get our fingerprints. We'll never get them all the way off, but can we get most of them off? Or can we get them only indirectly on or something? So you'll never get all of that. But I think that's fair because humans have fingerprints from their teachers too.
Last question.
I have a very flippant question.
Flippant, I like it.
It comes from seeing your paper. I don't understand the turtles reference.
You don't understand the term?
No.
Okay.
Is it a cultural thing?
This levels all the way down.
Yeah, was it Minsky that said that? I don't know who said it first. Minsky didn't come up with the idea of turtles on chocolate turtles, but he says turtles all the way down. In some mythology, the earth is sitting on top of a giant turtle. Right? And Minsky borrowed this idea to say AI in general is a problem because what's the turtle sitting on, right? It's turtles all the way down, and that's why. And of course, it had to be Dr. Seuss because yes, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
their output and preserve this record, this historical record of everything they're capable of doing, their diversity, their ups, their downs. No more cherry picking. If you want to know what a system is capable of, look to its bot coordination and look through thousands of tweets that represent everything it's capable of doing. Its fluency, its divergence, its flexibility, its originality. One of the bots that I'm proudest of is called Metaphor Magnet. It takes all of our metaphor prowess and squeezes it into 140 partners once an hour. And we want to take that metaphor generating system and generate stories through it, based on the idea of metaphorical semantic tension or meaningful incongruity, something that turns contradiction into sense. And the core essence of this approach is conceptual blending, which is really a very fancy terminology for people who are doing something else. Under conceptual blending, you take multiple conceptual input spaces, not domains per se, because domains are too chunky, and then contextually salient. And you selectively project from two or more input spaces into a third space called a blend space. And in that blend space, where there's a unification of elements from the inputs, you get emergent meaning that is in neither of the inputs. This example, Cronenberg will be the fly. Seth Grundle is building a matter transfer system, and he two, the computer gets confused, his DNA with the fly's DNA, and he ends up with a blend, a conceptual blend. Now at first he's kind of happy with life. He's strong, he's fit, he's agile and gymnastic, but he knows his hair is growing on his back. Soon he's vomiting on his own food as a way of eating. But he's also super strong, and he begins to look like a fly. Now, looking like a fly is an obvious. Having feature come from. Flies aren't super strong. He wasn't super strong. Well, he's as strong as a human. That's the emergent property, super strength that he gets. Model. Metaphor is a way of explaining the world. You Google engrams, it's a very, very sparse model of the world. Foreground, like research is the fruit, could be part of a larger literal statement, but it says that strikes me as incongruous because WordNet says that research doesn't belong to any subcategory of fruit. Let me see if I can make a deliberate metaphor from this. It knows a lot of things about fruit and about researchers from its knowledge base, knowledge base. It knows that philosophers and researchers people eat fruit in salads, chefs buy fruits, flies eat fruits, insects eat fruits. And those insects are lowly and lowly and afraid to bring out. So remember what research was conducted by prestigious philosophers. Remember when we used to think of ourselves like that? Now research is a fruit eaten only by lowly insects. Get the outside. So you see how it's framing the conversation to make it meaningful. This is the essence of metaphor. Make category errors meaningful. If there weren't category errors, they would be comparisons, not categories. The system has a sense of irony. Irony is simply a frame category errors to make them meaningful in a more pointed and critical way. Example on the bottom left here is another example of this general n-gram conversion strategy. Romance is insanity. With the soldiers of time, most of the most chaotic battlefields are also deployed by the most regimented armies. The system has missed a trick here. If it had framed it differently, if it said, irony, when the soldiers that are deployed by the most regimented armies die on the most chaotic battlefields, that would be much more poignant. The system lacks the real world knowledge and actually squeeze the most value out of its measures. But it really does try, using a variety of framing strategies, sentiment lexicons, conceptual mappings, and so forth. Can we turn this into a storytelling mechanism? Well, we tried. We had this project called the One Machine. Using these role in this was to generate the basis for the story based on a metaphor. So here's an example, fragment style yoga, just wonder what it calls. Strong as the force and stunted dwarfs, the stature they grow in. Grow fan bases they will. Towering stars will they be. So it finds contradiction between dwarfs, stars. Imagine the transformation from one to the other. What a great story that would be. Pixar never can call it. In other constellations. Chloe Moretz, who found that girl from Kick-Ass, you might remember her. And it's called Red Shoes and Snow White. Very bad title. It's called Snow White and Red Shoes. And the premise is exactly like the What If issue, is how it goes. Take a stereotype, play it against time. What if Snow White was no longer beautiful and the set of the dwarfs not so short? I mean, this is the kind of thing that we produce by the million in the One If machine. And this has gotten this company into huge trouble. It's called fat shaming. This is not so beautiful Snow White. She takes off the shoes and she goes, and the premise is that these dwarfs shoes and she has to confirm with her own body. And it's only getting slammed. What? Who did this? Who created the story? Humans created the story, not a computer. A computer could have done this and given you 999,000 alternatives. This was done by humans, and they have to bear the blame for this. But the principle is the same. Take a stereotype, play it again, and turn it into a story. How you frame things can change the perception of the value you give them. So the top one here is early yogism. Strong in the forces of in ugly assholes, the manners they learn. Buy flocks they will, all these shepherds will they be. The things Trump never said, we simply take a pattern called things Jesus never said. Those are added ones that have to do with immigration or demagoguery or business, and reduce the grammar. And we get 50%. But if we, see, this is the trick of the framing. If we actually wanted to tell stories like Trump, we would have to have a knowledge base of the properties, the qualities, the propensities. So we built a knowledge base with maybe 800 such portfolios, in total about 30,000 articles. We could give away for free. We call it an off list. Here's a simple dossier on Donald, right? And it allows us to generate Steve Jobs, which would be easy. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? Leonardo. Someone said Leonardo. It was me. So, we generate a story. What if Steve Jobs and Leonardo were in the same story? They're metaphorically apt for each other, so they make well-balanced agonists, protagonists and antagonists. And the scenario tries to fit them into the story frame. What if a dolphin thought it was Steve Jobs, funded a goblet, we thought it was Leonardo da Vinci? And it goes down. They're rivals, they've got big egos. The fact that they come from different time frames and it's an impossible story just fuels the what if. The emoji are used, the ASAP framing is used so that we can then refer back to them as simple emoji findings. What if we were to do some postmodern story where we had a fictional character and a real character in the story. Who's a good method to find out? We've all watched Game of Thrones, Game of Cards, House of Cards, House of Cards. Nixon. Who said Nixon? I got some cake for you later. Okay, so we're going to tell a story about Nixon. But it's not enough simply to say that Frank Underwood is like Nixon. Therefore, it would be a very good postmodern story to put him into the same story as Frank. You need to have a plot. And we have a knowledge base of plot structures, which is based on this click and extend model we call scale extra. It's based on the slot car racing motif, where plot segments are a little bit tracking together to get arbitrarily complex track structures, which reflects the logical structure of the story. And the two characters are like the racing cars that go all over the track. There's about again, we have the public domain if you want. Notice it's tweetified because the system evaluates, renders, and tweets all of these things autonomously. And it tracks them together in one coherent story. So what if a monkey told us Frank campaigned vigorously against Richard, but Richard humiliated Frank. Now how did he do this? If you tell a child will say, how daddy, how? And then you're going to have to invent some ritual humiliation. Now, here we know it's Richard Nixon humiliating Frank Underwood. How would he do it? He would insult him. What would he say? You jerk, you phony baloney? Well, he would make something personal, right? This is where metaphor comes in. The story is based on a metaphor. So if you need an insult in the story, why not? By calling the sociopathic and ruthless monkey the Kaiser Sose. They're both Frank Underwood. The system has generated a four-fold breaking postmodern joke using malleable commodity in storytelling. And everything is rendered using the knowledge base. So when they come together again, Frank helps Nixon in his struggles with Kennedy. Again, the knowledge base is inflecting the knowledge. Now, if we were to compare a generic plot using the same plotting mechanism, but without a motivating metaphor, and without the knowledge base providing the mise en scène to express the metaphor in various steps, you get a really banal story. Here, a generic koala, generic snake. Notice, by the way, that the stories are translated into emoji as well. We have a text to emoji mapping system that essentially illustrates the stories in a storybook fashion. But these stories, even though they use the same plotting mechanism, I think are much less interesting than these stories, which are based on metaphors. So we tested this. We used the storytelling system in two modes. One using motivating metaphors, and the use of metaphors within the rendering, for instance, to provide insults and flattery and motivation to the characters. And another system that simply uses the same plotting mechanism with no metaphoric rendering. And we asked people to rate these stories, saying we found them on Twitter. We didn't tell them that they were computer generated. We simply said we found them on Twitter, which is true because our bot put them on Twitter. And we asked to rate them on the dimensions of laughter potential, entertainment value, imagination, vividness, silliness, eventfulness. And we gave potted descriptions of what those terms meant. Eventfulness means how many twists and turns, how much drama is in the story. Notice that it's the same for both conditions because they use exactly the same plotting mechanism. But notice that the stories rendered using metaphors have significantly higher eventfulness. Story, even though the stories are generated using exactly the same twist and turn plotting mechanism. Our perception of actions and twistiness and drama is influenced by the rendering of the story as much by the logical underpinnings of the story. Okay, so I will finish. Knowledge is something that we need to build more of. It's Wikipedia. We need to build it for ourselves. It has to be something that isn't imported. Based on famous people, 800 characters, 30,000 triples, or knowledge base of story structures, plot structures, plot triples, verbs, everything, the whole caboodle our GitHub. And I recommend that you go to bestofallworlds.com. You want to use it yourself, it's ideal for students. I leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
Come on.
So Tony, when you say it's meant all the way down, it isn't, right? It's just 2 levels.
Well, it's a demonstration in 2 levels.
Could you add another level? Would it play any role? Would it get any better?
Point in rendering a story from word choice to phrase choice to speech act choice to another device at the end. I want to make the story seem like David versus Goliath. How do I do that? I want to make this story feel like someone say that's what we do, but in principle, most of our stories have this implicit framing from past experience from other stories. As I said, David versus Goliath, Cain versus Abel, Michael versus it could be a marriage, it could be partnership. Even concepts like marriage and partnerships are effectively a metaphor. Imagine a story about a business partnership that was betrayed by infidelity, but not sexual infidelity, but commercial or financial. All the way down to the lexical choice line.
You take it the other way up, and in relation to that, Twitter, because it makes the outputs available and for everyone to see, it needs to be no cherry picking and alteration. But isn't it in restricting the things you can do? Couldn't you take this medium, make larger stories and just write them as stories?
Yes, then that opens a new door, a new world of trouble. So you get into the Brutus realm, which can render a story immaculately. It's the one story about a supervisor betraying his charge, and it can do nothing for any other kind of story. It becomes incredibly fragile, or you have to bring in the Starlock pit of machine learning, which is something I wrote about doing that. And one of the integrity of the system. Oh, that got a few hands going.
I find it fascinating because I'm a British got.
I saw the tattoo.
And there's so I deal with some of discrepancies. This is the reason why absolutely stories shouldn't be longer or more complex, because then you have this tipping point with the perception of metaphor. So if it has so much cognitive, you push your cognitive knobs to the level it's most effective when the metaphor is actually more concise. You are constantly right? So this is the case. It also, I completely agree with you, it raises the level of emotional response just enormously. And I'm telling you, I'm dealing with the Friedrich Nietzsche interpretations. People cannot even see tree from the forest, right? It's just because they're so preoccupied with one of the metaphors, basically well in this whole cognitive system that they cannot see the entire story, right? But this is just brilliant. Yeah, it's exactly. If you introduce for a narrative a little bit of metaphor, but I would caution that taking it a little bit, if you overdo it at the same time, right? If you have just only started with purely metaphors, it might create a complete confusion, right? In the
yes, you could get lots of contradictory images.
Does your picture bot or metaphor bot use filtering?
This is a philosophical issue. If you have a merely generative system and then a big complex box and push them back into the generation that needs to be filtered, that's equivalent computationally, but philosophically it sounds less appealing. And that's essentially what we do, that we take the contents of the filtered black box and push it back into the generation mechanism. So philosophically it's a big question.
One comment and one question. I think to take it to the next level is an excellent way to really measure the limits of the system. So my question is, you said that the system evaluates
It evaluates its own stories. This is the sense that it's constraining what it's willing to generate. And two conceptual equal. So two characters that come from very different time periods, Steve Jobs, Leonardo, two characters that come from different worlds, maybe two different fictional franchises, Game of Thrones and House of Cards, that come from the world of the fictional and the real, something that creates a frisson of tension before you step it. So Leonardo and Jobs are pioneering inventors. Actually, Leonardo was an inventor and Jobs was a marketing guy, but they are considered to be pioneers. And then the rendering is how much information can we squeeze out of the knowledge base into the rendering. So are there enough events in the rendering or in the story that permit us to squeeze and elbow information from the potential for interest? Evaluates the story, it picks the best one to tweet and kick it out. It never generates something that it wouldn't want to tweet, but it generates a set of them and picks the one that it thinks is best in the context. Okay, I have two more.
That you basically, when you compare basically against the generic system, but isn't the metaphor system basically leveraging stories? Like instead of the generic system, which doesn't benefit from any existing universe, which means that the evaluation you presented basically is an existing universe and existing story space versus a novel story space on unexplored.
That's a good way to put it. Or hypothesis. That's the nature of the type. Characters, higher expectations of characters, and when you see the cash out of those expectations, mentioning JFK, mentioning Kaiser Soze, this that's a natural consequence. What we didn't expect was that the plot would be considered more interesting, even though it was using exactly the same mechanism. That was an interesting, but as you say, yes, the familiar characters were designed that desired result. But the effect on plot and the perception of drama was quite interesting. We should have expected the drama to be the same in both stories because it used exactly the same plot. and the use of familiar characters in those plots improve the perception of drama.
Okay, final question I have to ask.
What you're talking about is
Absolutely.
do you think the metaphors will still be as powerful as we have negative if we're talking about a lot of
The whole book is based on the metaphor of and it comes the whole book is about real versus solid versus insolid. And I'm not saying that we can generally get Greg Gatsby or even the lesser Gatsby. We're just Jay Gatsby on Twitter. Actually, he's in our knowledge base. Okay, Jay Gatsby, thank you.
All right. So the next talk will be presented by Ali Al-Najjar, and it's about expanding and weighting stereotypical properties of human characters for linguistic creativity.
And I'll be talking about expanding theoretical properties of human characters. And this is a joint work with Mika Hamalainen, Hanyang Shen, and this research is linguistic creativity, specifically metaphors. Tony is very important in creating metaphors. For example, the properties of we should know that the metaphor of Britney Spears is a cat, as Britney Spears is a property of cats. And the issue with semantic relatedness methods such as LSA and Wartovik, they give us a very generalizing properties and descriptive about the nouns. And hence, we cannot use them to obtain such things. Approach, we first obtain the initial knowledge base, and then we expand it and weight the properties. In the obtaining initial knowledge base, we use two main resources, the NOC list, which Tony covered, and the stereotypical properties of categories. In the expansion phase, we construct a related property. So the NOC list, I'll go through this briefly because fictional. The knowledge base, the properties, which are in positive talking points and negative talking points, and the categories. The stereotypical properties of categories. And we use a second resource because in the NOC list, there is no properties for categories. So the resource we use is provided by Veal and Howe, and it used the linguistic pattern as adjective as a noun through Google search API to retrieve adjectives of nouns. And after that, the adjectives were annotated by human judges to remove the noise. So the limitation of the knowledge base we have. Nouns in the knowledge base don't have that much property. For example, in the NOC list, on average, a character has 11 properties, where in the stereotypical properties, a category has 25 properties. So because of that, some descriptive properties might be missing, such as man is adventurous. In addition to that, in the NOC list, properties don't have a weight. So we cannot tell if Stewie Griffin is more evil or more intelligent. So now I'll go to the construction of a proper network. So we use the neighboring properties provided also by Tony, and this is obtained using the linguistic pattern as P and wildcard as, for example, as a suite and wildcard as through Google API. And this gives us 8,644 interconnected properties, and they were missed. So we use this neighboring properties to construct an undirected network. In the network, we have W that represents the weight between two properties, and N of P as the neighboring properties of a given one, and P of N as the initial properties a character or a noun has in the initial knowledge base. And P represents all properties. What we do is we go, for a given noun, we go through all the properties in the knowledge base, and we create a set of related properties defined of properties in the initial knowledge base of the noun. At the sum of weights between the related. In case if the property we are evaluating existed in the knowledge base, we give it a bonus, which is a constant. So here is an example. So let us try to find this. So we get the stereotypical properties of brave, agile, and so on. And then we brave and bold. And if we look at these two, we get resourceful, brave, bold, strong, and agile. For Batman, we don't add any. So after doing that on all the nouns that we have and all properties, we want to keep the best of them. So we prune the weak. A given property has a weight greater than the maximum of any weight in the graph. And also, we make sure that we remove linked to property. So the results of this method covered 99% of characters in the NOC list, and we started from 11 initial properties, reaching to 63 properties on average. And regarding categories, it had 82% coverage, starting from 25 and reaching to 132. So now let's move to our evaluation setup. So what we did is we picked up randomly 25% of the nouns we have, and this gives us 261 proper nouns. And then for each noun, we select 4 properties, and the selection is done as follows. We divided their properties into 4 equal weight bins based on their weight, and then we selected one from the strongest bin and one from the weakest one. And then we selected 2 other properties that are not considered to be related by the system. And then we crowdsourced the experiment on Crowdflower, and we used 5-level Likert scale. Judges were required to annotate or evaluate a given noun, like the 4 properties for a given noun. Judges were allowed to skip a given noun in case they didn't know it. And in addition to that, judges were required to speak English and live in an English-speaking country. So this is an example of the evaluation setup. So we have the character, and then we ask them if they know the character or not, and only if they know it, the properties will show up, and they have to evaluate it. In addition to that, they had the ability to answer that they don't know whether a given character has a given property. So in the analysis that I'll be explaining about, we map the 5 Likert scales into numerical scales, disagree to 1, disagree to 2, and so on. So the data obtained from the evaluation. 31% of the judgments didn't know the noun, so they skipped it. And the average number of evaluations a given noun had is 3.5. So in our analysis, we consider only the nouns that had 3 evaluations at least. And this leaves us with 100. The judge agreement on the 796 noun property pairs is 0. So now in the analysis part, we divide the analysis into 4 phases. The first one, which is identifying on finding whether the newly expanded properties are related or not. And we do that by having 2 sets. One of them is the related properties, and the other one is the random properties that we evaluated. And we run a 2-sample permutation test for their equal to the power of 7 random permutations. This yields a p-value around 10 to the power of -7. Either the new expanded properties are non-property scores retrieved from the evaluations. If you look at greater than the weak properties and random properties, which we evaluate the correlation between the evaluation scores we retrieved and the weights produced by the system. And this gives us, using Pearson correlation, this gives us an R value of 0.48, which isn't very high, but the p-value suggests that this is statistically significant. More agreement on the stronger properties than there is on the weak properties or random properties. And last analysis we do is we look at the percentage of unknown properties received. And weak properties got a little bit more. Fictional characters, unknown like answers. And this suggests that fictional characters have distinct use, like apt, case, apt. So the analysis of the problem, analysis of problems, this method sometimes might fail to find or match some properties. For example, using the linguistic pattern as P and while topping. The second one is the lack of sufficient evidence to explain. Don't have like initial knowledge. So here is like the main applications we can use this method in is metaphor interpretation and generation. So in metaphor interpretation, metaphor meaning, which is a corpus-based approach for metaphor interpretation, didn't interpret the metaphor, the woman is a cat, as a human. Because in the corpus that metaphor meaning used, woman didn't co-occur with the property wild. So we take 2 women examples from the knock list and the properties of cat, the category cat in the knock list, and we take the intersection of their properties. And For example, we get different properties depending on the woman. So for example, for Britney Spears and Kat, we get energetic, wild, and very intelligent. Regarding metaphor generation, Tony, the weights assigned by the system, and metaphor generation and the interpretation and evaluating how the result would be. In addition to that, the expansion of normal components. So we did expand now the properties in the nucleus, but we didn't expand the characters and their properties. So we are still restricted with around 100, 800. The third future work is expanding this research to multiple languages. And thank you. So you would expect this method to work if you have 3 to 4 or maybe 5 properties, and you want more properties for a given noun. And the noun, because we did it for categories and characters. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
When you're pruning these characteristics, try to improve characteristics that are uncommon. So, for example, we would never typically say Batman is a coward, but it is a possibility that Batman could be considered a coward. You know, in comic book stories, they frequently explore the possibilities of Batman's actions. So, you know, in pruning, is there the risk of possibly pruning things that could be potential for metaphor?
Yeah, exactly, I agree with you. But for our case, we wanted to expand the knowledge and have good quality properties that we want to be like we want to use in the metaphor generation and the interpretation. However, yes, I agree with you, because some important properties might be pruned down. And this is the case, for example, in categories where we didn't have high coverage for the categories. So in that case, you can reduce the pruning effect to cover more properties. But this would add some noise too. And this is why we just wanted to have the higher quality ones, and we had strict rules.
Thank you. Great talk, thank you very much. I'm interested in ambiguity in this context. So it seems to me that there's a potential gotcha in this approach, where you have words which are ambiguous and which have a particular metaphorical meaning in one sense, but not in another sense, which could then lead you right down the garden path in terms of the constructions you make. Do you do anything to try to mitigate that?
No, we are not doing anything on that side. However, I assume that because in the pruning condition, we try to make sure that at least 2 properties are related to the new property, at least 2 strong properties are related to the new one. And this should reduce the disambiguity effect.
Okay, so moving on now, also language, but more related with automated lyrical narrative writing. And you're going to actually
Can I get a little bit of help?
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's fine. Yeah, I'm mic'd. And
to get Maya again to start with.
Hi, everybody. Please give me a 10-minute warning as well. All right, so to connect it to my previous talk, this research was started during my student Divya's project and grew out of that. So here we go, it's all connected. So the goal here is to combine of creating lyrics that are more coherent. For those of you familiar with lyric generation, you can create lyrics that are fairly believable and impactful without them being coherent. But we do believe that being able to create coherent lyrics is better for certain settings and is a kind of valuable form of creativity. So there are 4 things that we were hoping to get. So it's the way that we really solve coherency is by incorporating storytelling. We want emotional engagement as well, and it needs to have some sort of poetic structure because otherwise maybe it's not lyrics at all. On the slightly more technical side, the way that we did it is we took our file system Mexica. It creates narratives, and we use these narratives as a starting point for making lyrics. And our system is called Mabel. You see, we feed in Mexica's output into Mabel. All right, so here is what a story made by Mexica looks like. It tells you the story in narrative format, so I'll read the beginning of this example. So Mexica wrote that the priest was born under grace of the great God. The lady was an inhabitant of the great city. The lady wanted him from the start. The lady hid her love from the priest, but she fell in love with him. The princess was in love with the priest. The princess admired the lady. So it's the idea, interesting story, to have an interesting story arc, okay? And of course, what ended up working really nicely is to intervene. So originally we thought we were going to have to change the narrative lines themselves to turn them into lyrics, but it didn't turn out to be necessary. We actually keep all of Mexica's output, but insert in new lines, so every other line is a new kind of line that we're adding in order to turn it into lyrics from a narrative. So expanding on this example, grace of the great God, and evolving from the shadow lifted. The lady was an inhabitant of the great city, but just remember there is a sign of intensity. So we're matching up the and connecting the new lines to the original narrative. A lot of stuff going on in there. Intuition, kind of a general. We're following each of Mexica's sentences with a poetic line. The way trained on love songs, lyrics of love songs, and we gradually eliminate candidates based on how well they match with the original narrative line, and then eventually, once we're left with the poetic lines that match our criteria, we just randomly pick from the remainder. Okay. And the next section, Divya is going to share with you. Is this working?
Hello? No. So the workflow Mabel has been divided into basically 3 phases, and that is generated by Mexica goes to all the 3 constraints and match. So we will go into each of the phases in detail in the following slides. So first one is the sentence evaluator. So we are taking one line and we have like trained our model on corpus of love lyrics, and it contains lyrics from And Markov model is like repeatedly called to generate a batch of sentences, and it is repeatedly called until it generates at least of 50 sentences that are like in good quality. And the good quality of each sentence is measured by like rhyme quality. And what is the rhyme quality of each of the sentence of the candidate line that syllables. So this component, it generates so after getting a set of candidate lines, filtered set of this is a sentiment analyzer. This is the second component of Mabel. So our what is the kind of emotional information emotional package in the form of and we are using it in the form of dictionary. So for each of the narrative line that is generated by Mishika, it gives information regarding emotions between the characters, and it also gives intensity of emotion between the characters. As you can see in the second line, there are two characters, Virgin and Eagle Knight, and the emotional intensity of between these two characters like it is in the more intensity towards hatred. And the second, the type of emotional intensity between the characters. We are about that. And Mishika's narrative lines, that is tensions. The tensions in the when someone commits suicide or when there is clash in emotion. So if there are two characters in the story that are in love with the same other character, so there occurs a tension in the story, that is clash in emotion. We are also using that kind of analyzer. It extracts the sentiment of the candidate line from an API, and it also extracts the emotional. Then and if there is a clash in emotion or love competition, then we follow the narrative line with the candidate line having opposite sentiment and style. Our figurative lines get more connected to the story. So after matching the sentiments between the lines, we move to the third phase. So Mishika generates story containing sentences in third-person narrative, but we have trained our model on corpus containing sentences in first person. So we have to go with the substitution process, where we substitute the first person with a third person point of view, so that our lines get more connected to the story. And in this way, we generate our lyrics. So as to, in the end, to revise the process for each of the narrative from Mishika, it goes through all the three phases, satisfying the stylistic constraints of poems and matching the sentiments and getting more connected to the story. So in this way, our lyrics is generated. Moving on to the next phase, Maya will.
We also did a user of lyrics, 3 generated system, and 1 written by human. And I don't have a lot of time to go into details here, but basically the human lyrics were still the best, but ours ranked second according to overall and according to the coherency of the plot. And now we have a special surprise for you, which I will, okay, so that's the time to motivate the special surprise for just 1 minute. And from my experience working on music, sometimes we can demonstrate that, but ultimately, and perhaps the lyricist, the people in the creative domain that are most critical. So I find it, in this case, turn those lyrics into a song and see how that works out. So we probably mention just one more thing. The music itself was done by Alicia. I have another system created with David Loker and Chris Cassian, which takes lyrics and comes up with melodies for these lyrics. So we combined our two systems. We made the lyrics with Mabel, and we fed into Alicia to get the melody. And what you see here is the final result, which we're about to perform. Okay.
No tomatoes allowed, okay?
Girl, when they feel those same, can't let go and it never goes out. She also abominated both be the things they said. The princess was shocked by the presumptions, and though her heart can't take it all how comes, but she fell in love with him. Girl, when they feel the same, the princess was in love with the prince. And let go and it never goes out. She also abominated what he did, be the things they said. The princess was shocked by the presumptions, and though her heart can't take it all out.
Thank you very much.
They wouldn't have time to do this song.
Can you sing another one?
Well, actually, there's actually a full story. This is not the lyrics for the entire quote. There was a love triangle, I believe, that she found. Love triangles are common in machine. Yeah.
Several things. First of all, this is awesome. It adds so much
Thank you.
joy. To make the music for me, because one way of evaluating any creative system is to use it for something it was not expected. So that's kudos to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. We're actually planning to integrate them more deeply because this information, such as love competition and all these tensions, can be incorporated directly into Alicia, giving it extra information about the kind of music it should be making. We're looking forward to that. More questions?
I have a question. I think it's very good you're doing this. I love seeing these systems, integrated systems where other things are being brought together. But surely the just interleaving the lines is, I mean, you probably do it better, right? Oh, could there be a way of sort of building a two-line thing with that includes input from Mashika in both lines, but gets bits that make it more poetic?
Oh, I definitely think that we can go a lot further. That's for sure. This was, to be honest, very quickly, and we would put it together, and we were amazed how well such a simple strategy worked. We were not expecting it to work. Actually, it was. I imagined that we were going to have to change the lines, and Divya tried it like this, and it worked. And that was very surprising for us. And we thought there was something interesting about the fact that we also indirectly came up with a new way of coming up with poetry. Experiment, we didn't end up including it. We had my students actually, we did an experiment on them. We gave them Mashika's line. That being said, we're not saying that this is the into lyrics. I think it's probably grown to many different directions. We could alter Mashika's original sentences, or we could generate whole stanzas based on one idea from Mashika. There's a lot of ways to go here.
Yes, you know, that we are using the notional information. It's a long road to go.
Yeah, so combining the emotional information from Mashika is really important to us, that these are not random lines.
I have a more presentation. Did you put the slide back? As to where you have the comparison? Yeah, that one there.
The users like
yes. So you said you had humans. So these are lyrics generated by various different, let's call them systems.
Yes.
And your humans. So it says rap lyrics there. And so they were generated by humans, or they were generated by something automatic?
So the left are all computer systems. Okay.
Well, where did the rap lyrics come from?
The rap lyrics, do you remember the name of the system? Yeah, we're going to look at the reference for you. So we thought that one explanation that we gave is that they're so emotionally engaging because to improve lyricism, we need to add some strong.
Because that's a strong result for them. I think that's, you know, that emotional engagement is quite strong.
Nice is to get that kind of emotional engagement, perhaps using strong words, but not having to resort to that kind of strong language. Yeah. For the song, I think once you add in the melody, I think the emotional engagement might be stronger.
I want to know if Mabel or Eliza are all inputs.
For both systems, we gave ourselves a goal of by the end of August. For our system and for other systems.
I think the lyrics is from the system.
We did not generate. The program, the procedure we wrote several years ago analyzes, identifies rhymes, assigns authors, but in the 23 times I gave that talk, I got asked to generate lyrics 20 times. And regrettably, that was before I had ever really thought about making computationally created systems. That work is from 2000.
So I have a question. Why do you start with rap music? Why do you start from the lyrics? Person generating but all these stuff, artificial intelligence is just create.
Rap lyrics, just to clarify.
I'm sorry.
The program we just need, I really don't want to do it for my.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, the question of music versus lyrics is, and both help each other, depending on which one you make first. That's what I'm informing the second phase. We deal with that at least a lot.
And actually, as somebody the brain, it's for me such an intuitive and easy way for artificial intelligence or computational creativity to sort of merge seamlessly in the ground of rap music, right? Imagine the person music. But on the other hand, these are very simple in terms of use by composition. So if they can react in sort of emotional reading of lyrics, that would be, I think, very.
Okay. So there is a particular rap which I've not worked on, but I can show you a couple of references. But my system, Elysium, which is not really something but it's okay. It builds melodies for lyrics. That's sort of the whole point. It doesn't just combine them in whichever way. It tries to extract as much information as possible from the lyrics too. Yes, I'd be happy to tell you more about that. Thank you so much. Sure. Yeah.
One more question at the back there.
Much louder, please.
How many people were in the user study?
Oh, the user study was about 30. Demographics were my students, so mostly undergrads. Oh, they didn't know. It was blind, so they weren't told who made what. And they weren't familiar with the system was being developed throughout the course, so they weren't familiar. They wouldn't know which one was our system, and they didn't know which one was created by a human. We were careful about that. It's important. Yeah.
Was it human existing songs or just something you wrote?
It was we picked a really good song, a really good existing song, which is perhaps why the results are so strong. We wanted to do a second iteration comparing it to amateur writing, and I think the difference would have been quite as pronounced.
Okay, next time we speak again. And the next talk is trying to build
testing. Okay.
a number of additional for once a negative experimental result being reported.
So my name is Carolyn Lamb from the University of Waterloo, and my paper is called Incorporating Novelty, Meaning, Reaction, and Craft into Computational. Is an attempt to make poetry out of Twitter. So who are we? My two supervisors and I are from the University of Waterloo in Canada. Now, some of you may know that this is our third appearance at ICCC, but this is the first time actually presenting results from a system that we built ourselves. Our first two things we did here were kind of more just evaluation. So the system we are working on is called Twit Sonnet. The idea of Twit Sonnet, poetry out of existing statements that it puts together into something hopefully coherent. The idea of Twit Sonnet was that it would be topical found poetry from Twitter. So, you know, a trending news event saying on Twitter about this. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of prior work we've done on Twit Sonnet, and I'm going to talk about our poetic criteria, novelty, meaning, reaction, and craft. And we're apparently talking about why those aren't working.
Sorry.
Just turn it off and back on again. That's good.
If you just stop that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yep, and start again.
Right.
Okay, good. Sorry.
So, does and how we evaluated it. Now, spoiler alert, as he mentioned, as Pablo mentioned, sorry, I'm bad at names. And as the title implied, I'm going to talk about what that means and where we're going from here. So let's talk about prior work on Twit Sonnet. Now, because we didn't realize there was already a Twitter system based on line selection. So first, the computer harvests a whole huge list of rhyming topical lines from Twitter. So how does it tell if it's topical? It uses the date that the tweet was made, and it uses keywords. So it's a very basic way of getting topical lines. Then we brought in crowdsourcing because this was a prototype. We just wanted to know that the line selection method theoretically works. So we not perfect. The concrete imagery, sensory imagery in the lines, because that is a really important poetic criterion that we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. It takes the lines that are the highest rated. It takes the pairs of lines actually that are highest rated, that rhyme with each other, and then it puts them together. Here on the right, we have an example of just 4 lines from one of the sonnets. These sonnets evaluated pretty well, and now, so we were happy about that, and the next step was we wanted to automate this line judgment. We want to say, okay, now can the computer do something that's actually a little bit more creative by doing the rating of the best poetic lines itself. But before we did that, we took a little bit detour into testing if we were rating the right things. We wanted to know if these criteria for lines are actually evidence-based for poetry. So we did a study on poetry criteria and know stuff about poetry. We got them to evaluate a whole bunch of different computer-generated poems from very different methods and sources, and then we asked them to explain their judgments. And by analyzing what these people said, we came up with these 4 criteria. A poem, and by novel, they don't just mean mere novelty. They don't just mean, oh, I haven't seen that combination of characters before. They're looking for something, for a new idea, even for a subversive idea. They're looking for meaning, which means a poem that says something coherently, or if it's nonsensical, they want to know that it's nonsensical for. They want to feel emotions in response to the poem, hopefully other than boredom. And the 4th criterion is the very domain-specific criterion of craft, which is does the poem use specific literary devices in poetry, such as concrete imagery is or enjambment, or just all these different So we got these 4 criteria, and we went and we did what we said we were going to do. We automated the line selection techniques, which I'll tell you how in a moment. We got the system, we collected the base group of Twitter lines in basically the same way. We put together the highest rating tweets in basically the same way, and the difference is that the line rating was automated. And you can see some of the results of this method on twitsonnet.tumblr.com. We posted them online. But how did we do this automated rating? Well, we went back and we made sure that we had at least 1 criterion that was based in the 4 criteria that we got from our poetry expert study. So for craft, we decided to start with something simple. We didn't evaluate every poetic device, but we evaluated several. Rhyme and form are obviously built into what we're doing because it's a sonnet and it has to rhyme, and that was already in the system. To evaluate imagery, we use something called the Regressive Imagery Dictionary, which is available online, and it's been used in previous studies of poetry. There are these wonderful psychologists and literary people who've actually computationally analyzed what separates good poems from less good poems, and concrete imagery that engages the senses is one of the big things that they found. And the Regressive Imagery Dictionary is one of the tools that they've used to measure. So we're like, okay, let's adopt that tool. That's pretty straightforward. Next one was emotion, and this was actually also fairly straightforward because there are actually existing tools that analyze emotion of Twitter that are like built specifically for Twitter. So we used one of those, and we actually upgraded a bit from the original version of TwitSong because now using this lexicon we can evaluate 8 different emotions, and we can just pick an emotion that seems to be the most relevant or the most commonly expressed one for this particular topic. For meaning, we used, obviously the keyword selection is like which are used in other areas of natural language processing to calculate things that are on topic. Now, novelty was a little bit more difficult. First intuition would we found that in practice when we did this, it didn't give us meaningful novelty. It, if you remember a few slides ago, there was a sample poem, and the last line of it was meatball, meatball, spaghetti underneath. So we found that when we tried to use very simple, intuitive ways of detecting, we know is that actually people are looking. The only thing we were actually able to implement in this phase of the system could repeat its keywords, so we made sure that it wasn't just a super repetitive, monotonous poem. Big enough to read. I'm just going to give you a minute to read that. Obviously, both of these were generated in 2016. Yeah, there is some profanity. Everybody ready to go to the next slide? I'm enjoying some of your facial expressions. All right, so after we built the system, and the specific thing that we wanted to know. Ooh, I got 5 minutes left. I'm going too slow. Well, the basic thing we wanted to know was that we already knew that line selection can, in theory, work, but we wanted to know that specifically the automated line selection was still working. And what we mean by that is we wanted to know that when the system used line selection, it was automatically rating these lines, that it outperformed the version of the system that doesn't rate any lines, that just puts together the first ones it sees that rhyme. So we did an evaluation that I apparently don't have time to describe in 5 minutes, but we really? Oh, okay, cool. Use experts, especially in a domain like poetry, which in any domain, if you study psychology of creativity, experts and non-experts don't necessarily read any poetry after high school. So the judging preferences of non-experts can be the opposite of those of experts. So we really wanted to make sure that we had expert judges and non-expert judges and that they evaluated separately. So we had them evaluate these 3 groups of poems. One was the version that I mentioned that doesn't do any line rating. It just slaps together the first things it finds in the data set that rhyme with each other. And go into. There were 8 different topics. And these gave a free-form response box so that gave them these 7 questions. And just give you a second to read that. Now, unfortunately, as you might have guessed because of the title of this paper, we found that in practice there was not actually, so the very admittedly simple, quick and dirty line rating procedure that we had was not outperforming just random together the first thing you see that rhymes. There's not a real difference. The only tiny difference was on the 7th question, which was how cohesive is the narrative, and there the line rating made poems slightly more cohesive, but again, not really. And you know, the difference between the experts and the non-experts either. They're all just interesting responses in the freeform box, which I'm not going to go into. So how do we interpret? We think we, as a research team, believe sometimes there will be a negative result, and what that means, it's not quite working yet. So it's possible that our automated line judgments are just not sophisticated enough. Sophisticated way of doing it would not work better. We just don't have the data. And what we're actually interested in doing as the next stage of this project, slightly counterintuitive, is that instead of trying to refine our techniques, there absolutely is a valid direction you can go in and refine the techniques and use make them as good as you possibly can. We actually are interested in going the opposite direction and go back to crowdsourcing and be like, instead, how can we enhance the crowdsourcing of what we had initially and maybe look at it from that angle. And we're also interested in seeing if we get better results using something that's not Twitter, because one of the comments that we frequently got in our freeform response boxes, especially from non-experts, is that people didn't like the Twitter poems. They were like, why is there hashtags in my poem? Why is there typos in my poem? I don't like this. And it's possible that as a repository for poetic text, Twitter isn't necessarily the richest or most valuable repository you could use. So that is our presentation and time for questions. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So what type of data sources are you considering?
We've actually been considering a slightly more political source of found poetry. Since this is all supposed to be poetry based, when the 2016 election happened, I was looking at what twits on it. Political documents like court judgments and see, can you make found poetry out of this? What happens when you do that? What happens when you, I think, Dan, you had a good way of explaining this.
Well, so I mean, the comment about the 2016 election, I think, is salient. The period in which making its posts automatically to Tumblr was the summer and early fall before the 2016 election. And I mean, occasionally it got these poems that made you think, but unsurprisingly, the topic kept being Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Brexit. And really, we didn't need more inanity in discussing politics. Whereas if you look after, I mean, there is fine art that is actually being made. Like there are operatic settings of some of the texts that came during the George W. Bush years of some of the quotes from various political actors in that time frame. And so it's an interesting question whether there really is some part of the power of this sort of collage and free association can come from having it actually be the language of the important actors rather than just random people standing on Twitter.
So one of the reasons we're wanting to move in this direction is because we're starting to want to move less away from, haha, look, it's rhyming things that people said on Twitter, and more towards, can we use found poetry to actually illuminate the events that are happening? So, sorry, I shouldn't say people because you're pointing at people.
Thanks. So great to see this kind of thing being done. And yes, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a negative result. It isn't the result you would like to have had. That doesn't necessarily make it negative. It is a real result that leads things forward, right? So the problem that you have here is that a similar problem which is that you don't really know what question that people are answering when they, so you can ask a question, but the question is filtered through the context that they are assuming a poem ought to be, right? So the solution we had to this was to produce music in a very, very specific context, and then to ask experts about that context. And it seems to me that that's really the only, sorry, when I mean experts, so we were asking about the sort of syntactic properties of that context, rather than their opinions about it. So stuff that was to do in this context.
That's a very interesting point. And what would you suggest as a very specific context for this kind of poem?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It's not my area of expertise. But I mean, it's not even so context. I would be. I mean, you'd be wanting to talk about maybe specific styles of Spanish, for example.
Right.
From a particular period, with a particular form. So, is this a good sonnet? Or I don't know. I mean, so it's the same in psychology, for example. When you're trying to do this kind of stuff, you're always trying to ask really, really tiny. And it raises some really interesting questions that we should all think about. It's really useful.
Thank you very much.
So I had this feeling about the style as well. It seemed the examples that you gave, they seem kind of disjointed. The best expert that you have for generating these poems too. Do you have examples which are fabulous and people will agree that they're fabulous?
I'm not sure if we have examples that people will agree with that they're fabulous, but I think I see what you're saying. Now, we did not do this in the current study, but in our study in 2015, we compared the poems made by Twitsonnet. We actually under a pen name, and so we had me go in manually and just look at all the ones. And we compare that, and so obviously the poems were some right that coherence is one of the biggest problems with this, and that's something that was the one thing that both the experts and the non-experts picked up on in their free-form comments. They definitely had very disjoint sets of free-form comments. They paid attention to different things, but both of them noticed that the poems are pretty disjointed.
I have a question. Are you checking? You are checking rhythm, right? Or I mean, are all these? I couldn't scan it as I was reading, but is it?
The lines are selected for number of syllables. That is actually a very good point because the system we're using is capable of selecting more closely for ambient pentameter or other rhythms. We actually slightly turned that off because it was so constrained that we were ending up with not really any lines that matched it.
Is this the pentameter?
Yes, I've seen pentametron. Our work is actually partly we've cited pentametron. So.
One of the very nice pentameter. It's kind of like
and the drawing.
And the drawing, correct. And it's kind of like the haiku generators that just look for 17 syllables but don't really care whether they have a common thing going on with them. The domain that Carol's program is working in is hard, in part because 14 lines if I am a priming ionic pentameter that go well together.
Even without checking for ionic pentameter, we would often get specific topics where you go through all the topics and it's like, well, we only have enough material for a quatrain, so here's a quatrain.
Because we tried this with Spanish, as Gareth was saying, and we tried to generate poetry from newspaper articles, basically. On rhythm and form, and we were generating, it was N-Grambay's regeneration of the text. If we used only the newspaper stuff, it couldn't do it. We had to inject a certain amount of poetic text into the, combining the two, it would use the words from the newspapers and words from poetry, and then it came up with interesting stuff.
Interestingly, one of the comments that I received quite a lot from experts, but not from non-experts, is that the experts felt I was over-relying on rhyme and meter. Because in actual contemporary English poetry, very few people are using rhyme and meter anymore. So the poetry experts who are working poets, who are making this stuff themselves, they're like, why are you trying so hard? So that's just a contrasting perspective.
Okay, one more question.
I'm not sure if this is too much expansion, but I actually really like that introduction poem, especially the last line. So, and you said it was bad. And like,
and I'm not sure if I can give completely a good answer to that question, but there's different poetic goals, and definitely in small amounts, like what I showed you on the slide, an incongruous line can be very funny, or it can be appealing because it's out of left field. But when you're producing a lot of poems, then that kind of gets it. It's like, oh, here's another sonnet full of nonsense that I don't understand. And then it stops being appealing after a few examples. So.
Okay. That concludes our session on language.
Plus at 6:30 there's a conference reception. The conference reception is just in 132, 133, where many of you were sitting earlier on that one. So right next to it. Second, because of as much as you want, the more you make it, the better it is. Ignorance is bliss, right? So the best thing you know about it is better. Photograph, as we are sitting here, we deliberately decided to do that.